White Dwarf issue 478 releases next week, and it contains a massive Kill Team rules expansion and is probably my favourite White Dwarf update yet. Issue 478 contains rules for creating your own custom kill zones, but seeing as you normally define traits of each terrain piece with your opponent before each game, unless using a specific predetermined kill zone that is, what this really is a massive collection of new, existing and updated terrain traits. This rules expansion is going to provide plenty of interesting variety to your Kill Team games, and may even help inspire you create some new terrain boards. There is a lot here, which might make the rules at first glance more suitable for narrative players than die-hard competitive ones, but competitive players should not despair. Terrain traits are still determined with your opponent at the start of each game as normal, so it is entirely at your discretion whether or not you use these. I'm going to break down the basics of each of the traits presented in the article, but please see the article itself for the full rulings. First up, we have Volatile terrain. Shooting attacks gain lethal 5+ against models within range of this feature. The range itself varies depending on whether the terrain is something as small as a fuel barrel or as large as a pressurized storage tank due to the different explosive potentials of each terrain type. Next we have Inaccessible. This is used for terrain that operatives would normally be unable to move over, such as chasms, lava, smouldering wrecks, etc. Unless of course the operative has the fly keyword and can just fly over it. Next up we have punishing vantage points. These rules are identical to the rules found in Kill Team Chalnath, granting models additional advantages for being up on an extra high terrain feature. Nothing new to see here, moving on. Games Workshop have finally introduced a dense cover rule to Kill Team. This will see a lot of use, I imagine, on non-urban boards, which can be more dangerous due to the lack of line of sight blocking terrain. Essentially, if a model is targeted through more than one piece of terrain with this feature, it is considered obscured. Kill Team now also finally features inspiring terrain, much like mainline Warhammer 40,000. Simply put, all models within range will gain a 5+ feel no pain save against all wounds suffered as it inspires them to fight on despite their injuries. Note that this rule affects both sides, with the opposing side getting the same benefit due to the hatred and loathing the terrain inspires in them. Next up we have the fortified terrain trait. I honestly can't remember if this one is included in Morok or not, but essentially, models within cover of fortified terrain can reroll one of their defense dice due to the protective nature of the fortification. If you have terrain however that provides a somewhat more esoteric form of protection, then you now have the protection trait. This is suitable for terrain which provides a force field effect such as shield generators or chaos altars. These grant a 4+ invulnerable save to models which are nearby. If you prefer your protection to involve simply not being seen however, then the next trait, smokehaze, is for you. Smokehaze turns terrain into a never-ending smoke grenade. This is useful to help narrow terrain features such as smokestacks provide a more effective role in blocking line of sight. This trait is similar, yet different to the rules which appear in Kill Team Enactment. If however you are a follower of Grandfather Nurgle, you'll be interested in the new Noxious terrain trait. Very simply, all operatives within range count as being injured regardless of which side they're on, which is very useful for representing things such as toxic smokestacks or particularly virulent disease sensors. Papa bless. Skaterball is up next, and nothing has changed here from Chalnath. It's very useful to represent things like ladders, or where you simply need to quicken climbing when dealing with particularly tall terrain pieces. This is one of my more used terrain traits in my games. It's nice and simple and provides a mechanical difference where one is needed. Inventory is a brand new trait, and one I'm happy to admit I'm unreasonably excited about. I have a fair few shipping containers and ammo crates in my terrain collection, and this trait provides them with additional purpose. Essentially, if a model is next to terrain with this trait, as long as no other model has done so that turn, the model can spend an action point to find additional equipment. This is done by randomly generating extra equipment points which are then immediately spent on items from your kill team's equipment list, as long as it can be equipped with that piece of equipment. Note that this does not explicitly state a given grenade cannot be selected if your team is already equipped with one, as per the recent ban slate, but it's definitely a point which can be debated with your opponent. I'm not convinced that this is a particularly effective way of spamming grenades, so it's probably allowable. Different from the volatile terrain we mentioned earlier, we now have dangerous terrain. Any model which strays too close must roll a d6. Depending on what you roll, either nothing happens, you suffer 1 mortal wound, or if you're particularly unlucky, your model will suffer 3 mortal wounds. The distance at which this affects models depends entirely on the terrain type in question. For example, the thermic plasma conduits pictured here might affect models that get within 1 inch of the exposed sections, whereas a toxic sludge pool would affect all models within it. Next up are gun placements. If an operative uses one of these, it can reroll a single attack dice when shooting or performing an Overwatch action. The example pictured in White Dwarf uses the recently discontinued Wall of Martyrs set, which I found interesting. More on that later, as we have just a few more terrain traits to go over. Don't worry, we are almost done. Defendable terrain. This remains identical to the rules found in Killzone Morok. It provides a significant defensive buff to defenders in close combat, making them count as attackers instead. Nothing really too new to see here, so moving on. The next trait is interesting in that it provides an update to the door trait found in Killzone Chownath, now called ingress/door. It specifies that suitable windows as well as doors can now be moved through, rather than just doors. I'm sure this is something most people were doing anyway, but it's now codified for those who want official clarification. Really quite simple and logical. Let's move on to the final terrain trait in the article. Strategic. Similar to a trait found in Killzone Enactment, any model which controls strategic terrain gains their team a command point. The terrain feature can be as large or as small as you like, basically anything with strategic potential. Note that you gain a command point per strategic terrain feature you control, so you should probably assign this trait sparingly, unless of course you want to go nuts for donuts and enjoy the havoc which comes from freely flowing command points, in which case, have at it. So as you can see, that is a lot of terrain traits to play around with. Some might argue it's too many, but I disagree, as they're all different enough to warrant their existence in my opinion. I would say it would be too taxing to use all of these in one game, but that's not really how they're meant to be used. Decide the terrain traits you do want to use, assign them accordingly at the start of the game, and then have fun. There is one more thing however. The article goes on to provide examples of custom kill zones using the new traits. As I mentioned earlier, it uses examples of recently discontinued terrain. When showing how to assign traits to the discontinued Wall of Martyrs kit, it refers to them as Killzone Wall of Martyrs. Likewise, the recently discontinued Hemotropic Reactor is also given rules as well. Given that the 8th edition 40k ruins were discontinued briefly and then repackaged as Killzone Chownath, and similar for some of the Mechanicus terrain as Killzone Enactment, it stands to reason that we may see a repackaging and return of some of these pieces of terrain. That could just be wishful thinking from me, however. I'm still kicking myself over not picking up the Wall of Martyrs sets whilst they were still available. So what do you think? Is this something you see yourself using, or is it a bit too much? I think it's curious this is coming out right before Kill Team Space Hulk, or whatever it ends up being called is released, which may mean the Space Hulk set will contain terrain rules not suitable for your average Kill Team game. Maybe a bit similar to Kill Team Arena from the previous edition. Anyway, that's it from me for this video. Drop a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing if you want to see more, and if you haven't already, hit that notification bell to be notified when our next videos, such as our upcoming battle reports, are released. I'll see you in the next video.